And we'll start with a pair of brothers that we've spoken about a few times here over the last week plus, and that is the Branch brothers, Zion and Zachariah Branch, formerly played at USC, and they're Georgia bound. These guys were on campus at Miami recently. It looks like Miami had made a late push there, but Georgia, who early on had kind of been named as the favorites to watch here, ends up grabbing them. Zion, the safety, who has dealt with some injuries over the course of his career, but physically gifted. And again, is a veteran guy, has played football for a few years, just has not completely stayed healthy. And then Zachariah, the electric receiver, return man, was burst onto the scene as a true freshman at USC a couple years ago. Numbers weren't the same this year, was banged up, but gets a fresh start here in the SEC.
Yeah, it's amazing a school that recruits as well as Georgia is in this position when it comes to wide receiver. I mean, everybody saw in the game against Notre Dame one of the worst drops we've seen, and that was the whole season, right? Georgia leading the country in drops. A guy like Zachariah Branch, an elite athlete. You lose Arian Smith, who's very much, he's not your pure receiver. He's a guy that gets by on his speed, his electricity. He's your leading receiver. You got to replace him and what he brings. Zachariah Branch, 5'10", 175, 10.33 in the 100 meters, 21.01 in the 200 meters, 24 long jump, 46, 4.25 triple jump. I mean, just unique explosiveness. Now, is the Zachariah Branch we saw as a freshman going to go to Georgia, or the Zachariah Branch we saw this past season? He did improve his receiving stats last season, but he was not the same dynamic player. Went from the absolute best punt returner in the country, leading the country in punt return average, first-team All-America as a freshman, to really middle of the pack as a sophomore. Again, his receiving stats went up, but you didn't see the explosiveness as a receiver. 47 receptions, 503 yards, and a touchdown, not making the big plays that he is capable of. So can Georgia get more out of this dynamic athlete? This is a guy who's related to the legendary Cliff Branch. Genetics are off the charts. Again, we went over the track times. A lot of Tyreek Hill comparisons out of high school and as their freshman year. So what are we going to see at Georgia? I think the opportunity there is golden. Certainly the need is huge. You see Georgia also trying to make a move for Noah Thomas out of Texas A&M, a totally different type of wide receiver who was on campus this past weekend. But in terms of replacing that electricity that you got with Arian Smith, certainly Zachariah Branch is a big part of that. Zion Branch, hopefully in your system, you can get more out of this guy, keep him healthy. He can tackle. He does have some physical tools, but certainly, in terms of what's driving the Georgia interest here, you got to think it's Zachariah and what he can bring to an offense that sorely needs some explosiveness.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see, as you alluded to, kind of how they use him in this offense, right? Quarterback situation, we'll see what ends up playing out there. It looks like they have their guy for next season, but at USC, I think at times, obviously, again, he dealt with some injuries last year, but his role, you didn't necessarily see him used probably as much as he would have liked to be used. More of a gadget player at USC, and he probably thinks he's more than that.
Yeah, and USC had a lot of receivers, and another issue with USC is they had one of the worst offensive lines in the country. So as far as the time from the ball getting snapped to the ball getting out, it was very abbreviated because the quarterbacks, whether it was Miller Moss, whether it was Mayava, they needed to get the ball out early because they could not hold on to the ball and chuck it downfield with the pass protection being what it was. Lincoln Riley adjusted his scheme to compensate for that offensive line. And I think that limited some of Zachariah Branch's ability to get downfield and make big plays. Again, 47 receptions. It's not like he was totally on the sideline, right, but the truly meaningful catches were not there for Zachariah Branch. And then the punt return, that's got to improve. I mean, we know he can do it because he's done it before. That's a way for him to make a significant impact. This is a first-team All-America player as a freshman at that position. So you want to see that improve. Again, he's had some nicks, but you expect him to get healthy. I think this makes sense for Georgia, but I'm not sure if this solves all of their receiving problems with one player. I think he solves a segment of what they need, but, I don't think this takes him out of the Noah Thomas sweepstakes. I think the need for that kind of player who can make contested catches, especially with Kobe Young's status, unclear due to legal issues, I think the need for a Noah Thomas is just as strong now as it was before this Branch signing.
Without a doubt. Yeah, we saw, look, Miami was in the Branch sweepstakes. We've heard that there was interest in Thomas as well. So they wouldn't be the only program who had aspirations of kind of pairing those two together.
Yeah, look, Miami really went after the Branch brothers on their visit. Obviously, there's a big NIL situation with the Branch brothers. Who's going to meet that number? You look at the fact that they're also Jordan Brand players. Uniquely, they had deals as high schoolers that they carry on to college. So Adidas schools, that was a challenge for those schools recruiting these players. But yeah, I think ultimately it came down to Georgia prioritized Zachariah, Zion kind of along for the ride, and they needed receivers. And obviously they provided what the Branch brothers needed. And I think there is a fit, but if I'm Georgia, I don't just say, hey, pens down, we got our guy a receiver. I would go just as hard after a Noah Thomas as I was before. And if some other receivers emerge in the portal, I think it makes sense to go after those guys. They need more. This school's recruited better than any school in the country over the past 3 years. They need more at the skill positions to truly measure up to, look, and they won the SEC, so I don't want to downgrade it too much, but there's certainly a standard at Georgia that's not being met, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. The drop off from last year to this year, profound. Stetson Bennett, those were not offensive driven teams, but they had enough to make plays. They need to get back to that level. Actually, probably need to get back above that level because it's hard to replicate the unique stockpiling of defensive talent that they had on those Stetson Bennett teams. I mean, those were multiple first rounders all over the place. And
a reliance on a Brock Bowers who is doing things we've never seen before as a rookie in the NFL.
Right. And you had Ladd McConkey earlier in his career. Certainly last year he had him fully bloomed. So to me, Georgia needs, defense can get you a long way. The best teams in college football this year were defensive oriented teams. The Final Four, all four of them are four of the top defenses in the country. And Georgia was right there on the door, plus having won the SEC really on the strength of their defense. So, it's not like you need to be the number one offense in the country. Miami was the number one offense in the country this year. They're on the outside looking in, but you need more than what you're getting. And I think Branch helps you at least in the explosiveness component. Right. We'll see what else they do to get this offense where it needs to be.